Thank you, Phil, and good morning, San Carlos. Good morning, ITC. I want to say thank you especially to the San Carlos tribe, Chairman Rambler and the rest of the tribe, but especially for the staff who took us out on that field trip yesterday. That was just really great. Thank you so much. I also want to thank ITC for 40 years of great work and building new partnerships as we've gone along. And for hosting this. This is just fantastic. And as other people have remarked, being on the floor here and being able to feel the dirt under your feet is just really a great thing. So let me get started. If I can get this mic out. There we go. First, I want to credit Brian Patterson with USET, because he came up with this really great way of talking about stuff in terms of Indian identity, putting together the idea of lands, children, and sovereignty, where lands are where we come from. Lands are our connection to what we do. They're our heart. It sustains us spiritually, economically, culturally, and we do that in the context of managing for our children. Children are our future. And sovereignty is that element that really binds together the past, the present, and the future. It allows us to move forward. So as you can see in this little idea here, is that where those three things intersect is where Indian identity, where indigenous identity resides. And that's what we're really trying to push for from my office in the Forest Service, is really trying to support sovereignty through shared stewardship. This is really what I'm about in my work with the Forest Service, is creating resilient ecosystems through on-the-ground, community-based projects. We want to collaborate in ways that build commitment to partnerships and ownership of the results. That ownership of the results is important because it's not always positive. Sometimes the outcomes aren't all that great. But we want to find common interests and leverage resources to get the work done. I'm going to go through several different publications and tools and things fairly quickly because we don't have much time. So I just want to say from the outset, the best way to find this information and how to get these publications and other things is just to use your web browser and put in Forest Service Tribal Relations, and that'll get you right to them. First thing I want to talk about is the new Tribal Relations Directives. So the directives are manual and handbook. The manual tells Forest Service employees what to do. The handbook tells employees how to do it, more or less. So we spent a lot of years kind of developing the ways that we could revise these directives to make them more effective, more efficient. And that involved lots of webinars and listening sessions and talking to tribes all over the country, a lot of internal work, but we finally were able to get that published last month on the 9th of March. That's really good, but we did some things that I think are pretty creative. We assigned responsibilities to all the deputy areas of the Forest Service. It's not just the National Forest System. So we assigned responsibilities, state and private forestry, research and development. Research and development, by the way, is the largest forestry research organization in the world, but also the business operations part of the work, grants and agreements and contracts and that sort of stuff. They have responsibilities in tribal relations. So that gets to the idea that tribal relations is everybody's business. It's not just the tribal relations people. It's not just the line officers. It's everybody, and the work that they do within the agency needs to have some tribal component. And that's really been taken off. We also codified a 120-day minimum consultation period. Remember, that's a floor, that's not a ceiling. A lot of times we consult a lot longer. And the consultation becomes part of a collaborative process, not just the consultation process. We took the step forward to define consultation. I don't know of any other federal agencies that have done that. It's a meaningful consultation. Essentially, it means that the consulting parties have a realistic expectation to make a difference in a decision. So if we're changing a policy or a process or something and tribes really don't have any chance of making a difference in that, then we still have a responsibility to do notification, to do discussion, to let people know about it, but that's not consultation. We also explicitly recognize the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and in particular Article 19, which has to do with free, prior, informed consent. So free, it's not coerced. Prior means that before the decision is made. Informed means that all the information is available to people to discuss. Consent does not mean that tribes have veto power. A lot of tribes would like to say, we don't give you consent, so you can't do that. But then it gets back to this idea of having a realistic opportunity to make a difference in a decision. So that's how we look at consent. So the way UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples expresses this through Article 19 fits really well with the way we think about consultation. It lays out requirements for training in tribal relations for all Forest Service employees. And this is eventually going to be mandatory through some web-based stuff as well as some on-the-ground learning engagements we're putting together. It identifies core competencies for all Forest Service employees who work with tribes. And one of those core competencies, as Dave and others have pointed out, is being able to tell our story of working with tribes. And it emphasizes the importance of protecting Indian sacred places. Also wanted to let you know about a new publication. A few years ago, we contracted with a guy named Ted Catton, a historian out of Montana, to write this book, American Indians and National Forests. So on the cover, you've got an Ojibwe guy standing with trees in 1902. So, and that was before the Forest Service was even started in 1905. So, I'm really happy to see this published. It's available through University of Arizona Press. Look it up on Amazon or directly from the press. The Tribal Connections web-based GIS viewer is a new tool that's available to everybody on the web. It's really fairly simple. It only has three main layers, and that's National Forest System lands, lands held in trust for tribes. But the clincher is we digitize the Royce maps. Those are the maps of lands ceded by tribes through treaty over time. So we put those all into a GIS coverage. But what's more important is kind of why we did that. The reason that this tool is important is not just to display jurisdictions. It's to point out that all or part of every national forest and grassland is carved out of the ancestral lands of American Indians and Alaska Native peoples. Indigenous communities across the country still maintain strong historical and spiritual connections to the land. Connections that have not been extinguished despite changes in land ownership. That's a quote from our Deputy Chief for National Forest System, Leslie Weldon. And that is on the, that's the starter page for this tool. You might recognize this photo. I took it yesterday, but that's Mount Graham in the background. This is what it looks like when you pull it up. You might see some red lines on here. I know you can't make out any detail, but I wanted to point out that the red lines illustrate where there's overlapping boundaries, where there's shared boundaries between tribal trust land and Forest Service. 4,000 miles of shared boundary between the Forest Service and tribal trust land. So where do you find it? Look on the Tribal Relations webpage. Again, you can use your web browser search engine to find that. Another really good tool we put together a couple of years ago is a publication. You can see it started partnership with USDA Forest Service or obtain federal financial assistance. That's really a clunky title, don't you think? So I just think of it as the Tribal Guide to Grants and Agreements for the Forest Service. And it lays out all the different authorities that we have for doing grants and agreements. Some of them don't pertain directly to tribes, but tribes are still eligible. Sometimes tribes have to work through states. We don't like it, you don't like it, but that's the way it is right now, and that explains how to do that. I'm really happy about this next publication too. It's not quite published yet. It's out for kind of a national review, internal review, but I want to get some tribal folks involved in looking at this too. It's a technical guide to the Cultural and Heritage Cooperation Authority. So that authority was in the 2008 Farm Bill, has 4 parts. One allows us to rebury human remains and associated funerary objects on National Forest System land when those objects and people originated or have some connection to the National Forest. It allows us to close National Forest lands for ceremonial use, for cultural and traditional uses. It provides for free use of forest products. And this is important because it's not the usual special forest products like mushrooms and boughs, things other than trees. This one actually includes trees and parts of trees. It also has a really great provision that allows us to keep information that's provided to the agency with the express expectation of confidentiality for us to be able to keep that information confidential. Of course, it's different having the authority to do that and having mechanisms to do that. So one of the things this technical guide is doing is trying to help us develop some of those mechanisms. Also, something that's been a long time coming and is just about ready to be put into effect is a tribal consultation and collaboration database. When I first started in this job about 10 years ago, first thing I told people that I was working for is that the executive order on tribal consultation requires every agency to have an accountable process for tribal consultation. And it was very clear to me we didn't have one. We couldn't tell what consultation was happening where, with whom, for what. So over the years, we developed a pretty good tribal consultation database in Alaska. We tried that for several years there, and it seemed to work pretty well. And we've been able to expand that partially because I had a chance to help rewrite the regulations for tribal consultation, collaboration, and cooperation for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I wrote it right into the regulations that we had to have a database. So now we're getting it done. Forest Service is developing and piloting this database for all of USDA. And I'm hoping by the end of this fiscal year, it'll be available for USDA to use. I mentioned before that we've got this idea now that tribal relations is everybody's business, all the different branches of the Forest Service. And it didn't take the directives to do that. One of the greatest trajectories I've seen in the last 5 years is that Forest Service folks are no longer just coming to the tribal relations folks and saying, okay, we need to do this. Can you help us do this? And what's this all about? You know, just real basic stuff. They've actually dug in and started doing the work themselves. So like when Brian Rice was with the Forest Service, forest management staff really buckled down and started taking on a lot more of the tribal work. The Wildlife and Fisheries staff has got great partnerships and developing awards for tribes for wildlife and fisheries stuff. But research and development has really stepped up amazingly well. And part of the reason they were able to do that is because they developed a tribal research roadmap a couple of years ago. And through the process of having a vision of how to involve tribes, they've actually been doing that. Every research station of the Forest Service now has at least one project going on with tribes, and many of them have many projects. Recently, Forest Service put together a tribal engagement roadmap highlights report, and that lays out dozens of projects that they're working on with tribes. So I have kind of a summary of that report with me, and so if people want a hard copy of that, I can provide that to you. So basically, what I wanted to close with is that the ITC Forest Service partnership has been developing over many years, and it's just doing nothing but getting better in my mind. Implementing the Tribal Forest Protection Act, the TFPA report was completed, but the BIA and ITC and the Forest Service had a lot of great recommendations, and we've been working on those. We've done 2 workshops so far in 2015, and we have one coming up later in May this year, the the 24th and 26th in Sacramento. The IFMAT report, Forest Service provided some funding and help on the oversight on that. It demonstrates that tribal forestry is awesome, and also laid out, as many people have illustrated before, that the budget situation is just really not even across the way. And also brought this up to show people. I'm happy to say that the Forest Service had a hand in helping get the Anchor Forest report out, the pilot project there. And I'm really looking forward to spending some time with that report. There's additional training that's coming up. We have now working effectively with tribal governments for all federal employees. It's available on the web. And then we have for USDA employees the same training, just modified more for USDA on this program called AgLearn. We've been working on implementing the recommendations from the 2012 Sacred Sites Report since 2012, and it's come a long way. One of the biggest things we're doing right now is we have a national training about tribal relations in general and sacred sites in specific, but it's not a regular talking head type of training. We're calling them facilitated learning engagements, where everybody who comes to these trainings will bring their own wisdom. Everybody will bring their own experiences, and we'll have really a discussion-based way for people to inform not only their intellect, but their heart and their spirit as well. Bring that all to the table. So we're going to have tribal people doing the training. We're going to have other tribal people in the room, elders. We're going to work in field trips and things like that. Very excited to see that move forward. So that's where we are right now. Other things to keep your eyes on is a huge push to revise national forest plans all over the country. So the 2012 planning rule provided some direction, some policy for people who are doing their plan revision to reach out to tribes, not just to consult in general, but really look for traditional ecological knowledge, look for ways to protect Indian sacred sites, and otherwise involve tribes. Look at the climate change hubs that are coming up. They're centers of activities around adaptation. We're working in partnership with the Department of Interior, Forest Service Research and Development, and the Climate Change Office. And we're continuing to improve our communications processes to, again, help tell the story. We have new blogs, a lot of webinars, website enhancements, and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So that's where we've been, where we are. So what's coming up? These are just, just a short list of highlights of things that I really want to concentrate in the next couple of years. One is to review functional area directives and guidance. We just revised the tribal relations directives. But what about lands? So when we take Forest Service lands out of National Forest System ownership, or vice versa when we take them in, we need to look at those lands very closely, not only for cultural resources, but for sacred sites, for other tribal interests. We need also to look at changes to the Farm Bill forestry provisions. A lot of those provisions don't explicitly have any room for tribes. Again, tribes have to go through the state foresters a lot. So we can look at that. We also want to look at additional tribal leaders committees. So years ago, I tried to get every region of the Forest Service to establish a tribal leaders committee. Have native leaders come together to help guide the direction for that region. Only Alaska has actually been doing that. It's been very, very successful there. It provides a great model for the other regions. So it's time to make another run at that. We want to better position the Forest Service to work with tribes in the context of wildland fire. I think the field trip yesterday was another reminder that that's really important. The things that St. Carlos and other tribes are doing provide a great model for not just the Forest Service, but other federal land management agencies. Just a little shout out to my staff, with Estelle Bowman, Assistant Director, just hired this guy, Chris Keppel, as another assistant director, stole him from Corps of Engineers, brings in lots of good perspective. Ann Williams is still our administrative assistant. Alicia Bell-Sheeter is our lifeline to all things climate change and is our liaison with research and development staff. Angela Pittman, we just hired her from BIA out of Minneapolis, and Rebecca Hill we also hired from the Corps of Engineers. If I could just get some of these folks back from detail, we'd be doing great. So Estelle has been working with Butch Blazer on a tribal youth strategy for several months now, but she should be back by June. And well, Marielle Murray isn't even on the list. Somehow she got dropped off the list. Maybe it's because she's been on detail for so long. She spent about a year with the CEQ, Council on Environmental Quality, and she's been spending the last several months with the Office of Management and Budget. So, thanks.
We'll see you.